talk to me about the election in your native country, Sierra Leone. How do you feel about the election? It is true that there were a lot of people, huge, voters turned out and what have you. Does that mean that people have confidence in the incumbent government of Ernest Bai Koroma, or is it because they were trying to effect change?
I think there's an awareness that's blowing across Sierra Leone now, as in a number of other democracies now that are emerging on the continent. Ghana, Senegal, just to name a few. You probably could arguably add, Nigeria and certainly South Africa to that
Maybe
number.
Benin, Nigeria. How can you talk about Nigeria?
Arguably. But the good thing is, Shaka, is that what we're experiencing now is that we don't want to go back to the old days. In these countries that I just mentioned, whatever may be the nature of the elections now, where can get some satisfaction. We probably can get some, appreciation from the fact that our presidents now can serve no more than 2 terms. Once, of course, they're elected by the people, which in itself is a movement forward. I think you'll agree with me.
You're talking about Sierra Leone in particular?
I'm talking about Sierra Leone, and I'm not, of course, talking about Cameroon. I'm not talking about Uganda, where, they seem to have limitless terms, the presidents and heads of state there. But Sierra Leone, Ghana, Liberia, all the presidents can serve for no more than 2 terms. Senegal, I just mentioned it earlier, they almost wanted to have their president serve, I believe, a 3rd or longer term. But of course, the people rose up against this, and of course, democracy prevailed.
Does having term limits by itself necessarily translate into what you would consider to be democracy?
I just said that was an aspect, one of the elements. Of course, we have to work on the nature of the elections, the conduct, which I think is what some may have concern about. I mean, because it's not perfect even here in the United States, quote unquote mother of democracy. Mm-hmm. But we had these elections. There were some skirmishes. We have heard, but from credible monitoring groups, Commonwealth Observer Group, ECOWAS, the European Union, they have at least relatively, they said it's been free and fair and peaceful, and we're waiting the results.
But what about the fact that some of them, in fact, including the European Union, they are concerned, or at least they seem to be concerned, mm-hmm. about what they see as a lack of a leveled political playing field. Mm-hmm. For example, opposition parties probably didn't have as much access mm-hmm. to the media.
Right.
Nor did they have as much access to deep pockets, like the ruling party.
Absolutely. Well,
should that be a concern?
That is a definite concern. But should that, disqualify this entire election? The fact that they did not have, the as you call it, the adequate resources as the government, as the incumbent had, and similar things, because. Even here in the United States, I mean, when we have elections, more often than not, the incumbent has the bully pulpit, which is what he runs this election on. And I think the verdict is still out on as far as the European Union observers go. So I don't think they will disqualify the elections, but they just are waiting for. Everybody's waiting, breathlessly. There's some definite amount of suspense here on these results, for which we've only seen 75% of them to date.
Kwame, you seem to want to get into the politics of comparing and contrasting Sierra Leone with the United States. But what about the fact that when you have an election in this country, sincerely, even if you are an incumbent president like Barack Hussein Obama, you do not use government resources to run your campaign. But you could actually do that in a lot of African countries. And from the little I have heard about Sierra Leone, there is hardly any difference between the ruling party and the government of the day.
You have a point there in that the ruling party, which is the government, they had 60% of airtime on SLBC, Sierra Leone Broadcasting Corporation, as compared to the opposition, which had only about 18%.
Is that supposed to be a national broadcaster, or does it in fact function as a state broadcaster under the control of the man in the State House?
Well, that is a question there. I know that it was called SLBS, Sierra Leone Broadcasting Service. Now I think it has there's some measure of independence that it has. It's now a corporation, Sierra Leone Broadcasting Corporation.
It is answerable to who? To Parliament or to the President?
Let's say it is semi-autonomous, you know. And now, as I say, I'm not on the ground. I'm here. But as a diaspora Sierra Leonean who is interested in the affairs of my country, I mean, maybe these are areas that call for improvement. As we move forward. There are of course a lot of independent radio stations and community radio stations, like you just spoke to Andrew Kuroma, who runs Radio Sky, which is a community radio station, and I believe you also said it's an affiliate of the VOA.
He also has, of course, Kiss FM in the Bo.
He has Kiss FM, yeah, absolutely. And he does work with people like Search for Common Ground here in the United States and others. But we do have. SLBC is, like we would say, the government or the establishment radio station in Sierra Leone and television station. So probably they would have to answer some of these questions you're asking me about. Why did they allot more time to the government of the day than to the opposition?
What about the independence of the National Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone? To what extent is it in fact independent?
I was just reading up on how they are elected, because the previous government, I believe, elected Dr. Christiana Thorpe,
right,
and maybe this was sanctioned by the opposition leader, then opposition leader Ernest Kuroma, who today now is the president.
Correct.
And so she, of course, now is the head of the NEC, and so she has to. So we're waiting on the results. I'm not saying that the incumbent is going to go in. Neither am I saying the opposition is going to go in. It remains to be seen. I was just saying, based on the results to date that she has given us, it looks like it's pointing in the direction of the incumbent. But the opposition still is complaining about some irregularities, I think some ballot stuffing here and there. And
in fact, from what I have read, it looks as if it is alleging that some of this ballot stuffing was actually either carried out by members of or elements of the National Electoral Commission, or it was being done in their presence, under their supervision.
Well, I mean, these days we have cell phones. We can produce. People can produce evidence of these things. If there's there for us, for people to see, that would be helpful. But rather than just hearsay. But again, there's some credible evidence. Sure, I think these probably should be taken up in the courts of law. I agree with that. Again, let us look at the positives. There were lots of people that came out in Sierra Leone. The elections began at 7 a.m. They started in a few areas, or maybe it was just a handful of areas, or it was one or two around that started maybe a couple hours late. But by and large, it was peaceful, calm, and it looks like lots of the people that we hear of in the media are satisfied with the way it was run. I don't know why there's the delay, or why I maybe should not call it a delay. Maybe there's a lot of vote counting to be done, but you know, I hear there's going to be some announcements people are waiting for later today, maybe even from your counterpart BBC. But that's what I was just hearing on the internet, on other sources, just before I entered your studio.
You know, Kwame, there was a man called Comrade Joseph Stalin.
Okay.
He was the leader of the then Soviet Union.
Okay.
He was quoted once as having said that as far as he was concerned, he wasn't really bothered by who was coming or going to vote for him, but rather who was going to count the votes. So does it really matter at the end of the day if we have a huge turnout and the results do not necessarily reflect the will of the people?
Let us just wait for the final outcome, and then maybe, you know, because as I say, there were election observers and monitors there.
Right.
And they said they saw the counting going on. The Commonwealth has spoken. EU even has spoken about that. They said that the red tide was handled, but again there was some, you know, as I say, there are some irregularities, and those have to be looked into.